Tupac Shakur's murder has remained one of the most haunting unsolved stories in modern music history. An event frozen in time, yet constantly evolving with new claims, resurfaced theories, and voices that refuse to let it fade into silence. Nearly 3 decades later, the case feels less like a closed chapter and more like an unfinished story, one that keeps rewriting itself every time someone new speaks out. But here's the question that continues to linger. After all these years, are we actually getting closer to the truth? Or are we simply adding more layers to a mystery that may never be fully solved? To understand why this case still grips millions, we have to go back to that night, September 7, 1996. Las Vegas was alive with energy. The Mike Tyson fight had drawn celebrities, fans, and industry figures from all over the country. Among them was Tupac Shakur, already one of the most influential and controversial figures in hip-hop. After the fight, Tupac left the MGM Grand with Suge Knight, head of Death Row Records. They were riding in a black BMW, part of a convoy heading toward Club 662, Suge's nightclub. It should have been a routine night of celebration. Instead, it became one of the most infamous moments in music history. At a red light near East Flamingo Road, everything changed. A white Cadillac pulled up beside them. Within seconds, gunfire shattered the night. Multiple shots were fired. Tupac was hit several times, in the chest, arm, and thigh. Suge Knight was grazed but survived. The Cadillac disappeared into the darkness, leaving chaos behind. And here's something that still raises questions today. How could such a high-profile shooting happen in a busy area, and the suspects vanish without a trace? Tupac was rushed to the hospital, where he fought for 6 days. Doctors tried everything, but his injuries were too severe. On September 13, 1996, Tupac Shakur was pronounced dead. He was just 25 years old. A life filled with talent, controversy, and influence, cut short in a moment that still feels unreal. In the aftermath, the world expected answers. But none came. No immediate arrests. No trial. No clear suspects brought to justice. Just silence. And that silence didn't just frustrate fans, it deeply affected Tupac's family. For them, this wasn't just a case file. It was personal. It was pain that never had a resolution. Over the years, Tupac's sister, Sekiwa Shakur, has been one of the most vocal advocates for justice. She has repeatedly emphasized that the investigation never truly reached its full conclusion. When Dwayne "Keefe D." Davis was finally arrested in 2023, many saw it as a breakthrough, a long-awaited turning point. But Sekiwa's response was layered. She called it a pivotal moment, yes, but she also made something very clear. More than one person was involved. That single statement reopened the case in the public's mind. Because if Keefe D. was only part of the story, then who else was there? Who else knew? And perhaps most importantly, who else has remained silent all these years? Tupac's stepbrother, Mopreme Shakur, echoed similar concerns. He described the situation as far from over, suggesting that the arrest was only one piece of a much larger puzzle. The family's pursuit of justice has expanded beyond criminal proceedings. They've explored wrongful death lawsuits and even initiated private investigations with the help of high-profile legal experts. This isn't just about punishment, it's about clarity. It's about finally answering a question that has haunted them for decades. What really happened that night? And yet, just as it seemed like the case might be moving toward resolution, new controversy emerged, this time from someone who was there. Suge Knight. From inside a California prison, Knight began making explosive claims that reignited old tensions and introduced new allegations. According to him, there were people within Tupac's own circle, or at least within the broader death row environment, who may have had prior knowledge of the attack. One name he brought into the spotlight shocked many, Snoop Dogg. Knight suggested that Snoop may have known something beforehand, or worse, may have had indirect involvement. These claims were not backed by physical evidence, recordings, or verified witnesses. Instead, they were based on what Knight said he had been told, reportedly involving second-hand conversations linked to Ray J. This raises a critical question. When accusations are built on hearsay rather than evidence, how should they be interpreted? Are they clues, or distractions? Knight didn't stop at suggesting prior knowledge. He also claimed that Snoop never visited Tupac in the hospital, contradicting statements Snoop had made publicly over the years. He pointed to Snoop's absence from certain events that night as suspicious, implying it might not have been coincidence. But again, these are claims, not confirmed facts. Snoop Dogg responded briefly, dismissing the accusations and hinting that they might stem from ongoing disputes, particularly those involving death row records and its legacy. And that brings us to another layer of this complex story. How much of what we're hearing today is about uncovering the truth, and how much is influenced by old rivalries, business conflicts, and personal history? Because the deeper you dig, the more complicated it becomes. Long before these recent accusations, there were already multiple theories circulating, some grounded in investigation, others fueled by speculation. One of the more controversial theories involves rapper Lil Half Dead. According to certain narratives, there may have been tension between him and Tupac, possibly linked to creative disputes in their early careers. Some versions of the story claim Tupac used material from a demo tape without proper credit. But here's the reality. There is no verified evidence supporting that claim. In fact, Tupac himself explained that one of his most famous songs, Brenda's Got a Baby, was inspired by a real news story, not someone else's work. Still, the theory didn't disappear. Instead, it evolved. Some speculated that Lil Half Dead may have had connections to the individuals in the white Cadillac. Others expanded the idea further, suggesting internal conflicts within death row records could have played a role in the events of that night. These ideas were partly fueled by former investigator Russell Poole, who spent years exploring alternative angles in the case. His theories were later amplified through books, documentaries, and online discussions, reaching audiences far beyond traditional media. But despite all the attention, one key fact remains unchanged. There is no direct evidence placing Lil Half Dead at the scene. So why do these theories continue to circulate? The answer may lie in the nature of the case itself. When a high-profile crime remains unsolved for decades, it creates a vacuum, one that gets filled with speculation, assumptions, and competing narratives. People want answers. And when official explanations fall short, alternative theories begin to take hold. It's human nature. We search for patterns. We try to connect dots, even when those connections aren't fully supported by evidence. But that leads us to another important question. At what point does speculation become distraction? Because while theories can keep a story alive, they can also pull attention away from verified facts, making it harder to separate truth from fiction. And in a case like Tupac's, that distinction matters more than ever. Today, with new legal developments and renewed public interest, the story is once again in the spotlight. The arrest of Keefe D has given investigators a potential pathway forward. But it has also reopened old wounds, reignited debates, and brought unresolved tensions back into focus. For Tupac's family, the goal has never wavered. Through decades of grief, public scrutiny, and unanswered questions, their pursuit has remained rooted in three simple but powerful words: justice, accountability, and closure. Yet as the years pass and the layers of this case continue to unfold, those words seem to drift further away, almost like echoes fading into the distance. Because for the public, this is no longer just a case. It's a mystery that refuses to settle. It's a story that keeps rewriting itself. And it's a truth that feels just out of reach. Was Tupac targeted by rivals in a calculated act of revenge? Were there deeper, more personal conflicts brewing beneath the surface? Conflicts that never made headlines? Did people witness more than they admitted? Did silence become a shield for those who knew too much? And perhaps the most haunting question of all still lingers in the background, unanswered and uncomfortable. Will the full truth ever be revealed? Nearly 3 decades later, one thing is certain. This story didn't end in 1996. That night may have been the beginning, but everything that followed turned it into something far more complex. The silence that came after. The speculation that filled that silence. The accusations that blurred the lines between fact and fiction. And the relentless search for answers that, even today, feels incomplete. This is no longer just about what happened. It's about what wasn't said. It's about what was hidden. And it's about how, over time, the unknown has become just as powerful as the known. Because when facts are missing, people don't wait. They fill the gaps. And sometimes, those gaps grow louder than the truth itself. Among the many voices that have contributed to this ongoing conversation, One name continues to resurface: Reggie Wright Jr., the former head of security at Death Row Records. His perspective carries weight, not because it provides definitive answers, but because it challenges the version of events that many have come to accept. Wright has repeatedly suggested that Snoop Dogg may know more than he has publicly shared. Not that he was directly involved in the crime, but that the story presented to the public may be incomplete. And that distinction matters, because knowing something and proving something are not the same. Wright points to the tension between Tupac and Snoop in the weeks leading up to the shooting. A tension that, at the time, reflected a larger divide within the hip-hop world, a cultural clash between East Coast and West Coast artists that had grown increasingly intense. When Snoop publicly showed support for artists on the East Coast, it didn't go unnoticed. Not by fans. And certainly not by Tupac. The atmosphere shifted. Conversations became strained. And what was once seen as a brotherhood began to show signs of fracture. Snoop himself has acknowledged that something had changed. He described their final interaction not as emotional or dramatic, but as distant, quiet, unresolved. A long flight where two men who once shared a bond barely spoke. No confrontation. No closure. Just silence. And that silence now carries a weight that words never could. Because what happens when two people never get the chance to fix what's broken? How does history define a relationship that ended without resolution? Do we remember the loyalty or the distance? The brotherhood or the tension? Wright argues that the narrative we see today, one of unity and mutual respect, may only tell part of the story. That something real, something important, has been left out. But again, questions are not answers. Implication is not proof. And in a case like this, where emotions run deep and perspectives vary, separating truth from interpretation becomes almost impossible. While these debates continue, across interviews, documentaries, and endless online discussions, the official investigation has followed a very different path. A path grounded not in speculation, but in evidence. At the center of that path stands one man, Dwayne Keefe D. Davis. Unlike many others connected to this case, Davis didn't remain in the shadows. He spoke. And he spoke often. Through interviews, public appearances, and even a memoir, he placed himself at the scene. He described being in the white Cadillac. He detailed the moments leading up to the shooting. He admitted to playing a role in what happened that night. For years, his words existed in a strange space, public, yet not fully acted upon. Until they were. In 2023, everything changed. A grand jury indicted Davis on charges of open murder with a deadly weapon. For the first time in nearly 30 years, the case took a definitive legal turn. Law enforcement made their position clear. They believe Davis orchestrated the attack. They believe it was retaliation, specifically tied to an earlier altercation that same night involving his nephew, Orlando Anderson. According to investigators, the pieces align. Ballistics evidence, surveillance footage, witness accounts, and perhaps most significantly, Davis's own statements. Together, they form a narrative that, from a legal standpoint, appears direct and structured. And here's a critical point that cannot be ignored. Snoop Dogg's name does not appear in any official documents. Not in the indictment. Not in witness testimony. Not in the physical evidence presented. Which brings us to a crossroads. Two parallel realities. On one side, a legal case built on tangible evidence, timelines, and documented admissions. On the other, a landscape shaped by personal accounts, suspicions, and unanswered questions. So which one tells the real story? Is the truth contained within the courtroom, or scattered across years of interviews and speculation? Or is it something else entirely? Something that exists between the two? As of now, Davis has pleaded not guilty. His trial, scheduled for August 2026, has already faced multiple delays, largely due to the sheer volume of evidence that must be reviewed. And when it finally begins, it will mark a moment that many thought would never come. Because for the first time, this case will be examined not through headlines or opinions, but through sworn testimony. Under oath. In a courtroom. Where every word carries consequence. And every claim must be supported. This is where speculation meets reality. Where stories are tested. Where narratives are either confirmed or dismantled. Because while public opinion can shape perception, it cannot determine truth. Only evidence can do that. Still, even with a trial on the horizon, the Shakur family remains steadfast in their belief that the story is not complete. They are not satisfied with partial answers. They believe more people were involved. They believe more truth exists beyond what has been revealed. And perhaps most importantly, they are not willing to stop searching. Their persistence raises a powerful question. What does closure really look like in a case like this? Is it a conviction? A confession? A full, detailed account of what happened? Or is it something deeper, something that goes beyond the legal system? Because sometimes, even when answers are given, they don't feel complete. And sometimes, the truth, when it finally arrives, is not what people expected. As the trial approaches, anticipation continues to build. Not just among those directly connected to the case, but among millions who have followed this story for years. People who have formed their own conclusions. People who have questioned everything. People who are still waiting. Waiting for clarity. Waiting for confirmation. Waiting for something that finally makes sense. But here's the reality that few want to confront. What if the truth doesn't resolve everything? What if it answers some questions, but leaves others behind? What if, after all this time, the full picture still feels incomplete? Because in cases like this, the truth is rarely simple. It's layered, complicated, and sometimes uncomfortable. Which leads us back to the question that has never really gone away. After all these years, are we ready to accept whatever the truth turns out to be? Or have the stories, the theories, the speculation, the emotional investment, become so deeply rooted that the truth, no matter what it is, will never feel enough? Because uncovering the truth is one thing. Accepting it is something else entirely. And in a story like this, where mystery has become part of its identity, the line between truth and belief is thinner than ever. So now, the question returns to you. Do you believe we're finally getting closer to the truth? Or are we still navigating a maze of theories, waiting for something, anything, that finally brings clarity? Because sometimes, the hardest part of a mystery isn't solving it. It's realizing that the answer may never be as clear as we hoped. And sometimes, the silence that follows speaks louder than anything else.